Well, welcome. This afternoon, we're talking about how to handle disappointing grades, ways to uncover the reasons behind your child's school performance, and how to help. I'm your host today. My name is Ann Dolin, and I bet some of you are here today, as you mentioned in the chat, because you have a chronic problem. Your child has a chronic problem with grades, and you've been dealing with this for a while. It could be that your student is actually a pretty high achieving student, has gotten good grades in the past, but this quarter, the beginning of the year, you've seen things that have taken you by surprise. Or it could be that your child is consistently inconsistent, meaning that they're up and down, and every year you cross your fingers that this year is going to be the one that's better. And by this time, even if the year started out okay, you see that dip in the grades again. So regardless of the reason you're here this afternoon, I get it. And for the last 26 years, my company, my coaches, tutors, and I have been working with kids here at Educational Connections, and I guarantee that you are in the right place. All right, so here is the thing. I believe that all kids want to do well in school. They want to please, they want to earn good grades, and they want you to be proud of them. But sometimes it just doesn't look like that. Their intentions are in the right place, but their ability, as many of you mentioned in the chat, their ability to know what they have due, to turn their work in on time, and to study correctly, well, these are the problems. And so sometimes it looks like they don't care. Maybe they're lazy. It looks like they have a motivation issue, but often that's really not the case. The problem is in the execution. It's actually in their ability to sit down, get the work done, know when it's due, turn it in. Now, when kids have problems with executing, they get into this dangerous doom loop. So they get this bad grade. They hear criticism from others. It could be from their parents, their teacher, maybe their sports coach. And that results in lowered confidence. And this is really the big one. And sometimes we kind of dismiss this part of the equation. But to me, this is where the real toll is. When you have low confidence and you feel bad about yourself, sometimes feeling bad about a subject can bleed into other subjects. And before you know it, you have a kid who just feels terrible across the board in all of school. And when you're not feeling so great about yourself and you don't have a lot of confidence, what do? You don't try harder, you put in reduced effort. And then this dangerous doom loop starts all over again. I'm wondering, please put this in the chat. Does this at all sound familiar to you? Has this ever happened in your house? I'm curious. So moving on from the doom loop, why is this happening in the first place? Why do kids get in this doom loop? And what are the causes behind their grades? Well, there's a couple of things that can happen. Number one, they don't understand the content or they have a skills gap. This is usually specific to a subject like math. We see this in cumulative subjects, and I noticed that a lot of people said things like math, physics, somebody said French, somebody else said Spanish. So we often see content issues in cumulative subjects where one skill builds upon another. But maybe that's not the case. The actual case is what many of you other people said. It's not that. It's that they don't have great executive function skills, being organized, planning ahead, studying. Sometimes, and this is the case for many kids, it's not one or the other. It's like kind of a combination of both. So I'm wondering, where does your child fall? Is it one or the other, or is it both? Now, I mentioned executive function, but what does that really look like? You know, there are these executive functions actually cause kids a lot of difficulty. And take a look at this diagram we have here, this picture. And you can see that these gears, everything is all intertwined. Executive functions are processes in the frontal lobe of the brain, right behind your forehead. And, you know, they're not fully developed until somebody is in their mid-20s. And to be honest, some kids are just better at this than others. And these executive functions have to do with things like being organized, And not just stuff like your backpack, your binder, maybe your locker, your desk at home, but also where things are, like the digital files on your laptop. Another one is time management, your ability to look at how long you have to do something to do and about how long it's going to take you and slot those tasks into your calendar. And again, kind of like knowing, all right, I've got about this much time to fit in this task. I can generally get it done in time. And can you go through your day estimating your time fairly well? That's time management. Focusing along the way, are you able to focus well enough to get the task done? And if you're not and you get off track, can you get yourself back on track? And it's also just planning and prioritizing, knowing, okay, I've got to do this first, second, or third, and I put this thing first for a reason. Maybe it counts for more of my grade, or maybe I don't want to do it, so I'm going to get the hard thing done first. And then lastly, another executive function is task initiation, which is a fancy term for just getting started. And, anybody can get started on something that they like to do. That's so easy. But the true test of good executive functions is making yourself start something that is just inherently hard for you or that you don't want to do. So you can kind of see like, oh, wow, these executive functions, they're really important for school success. And when they're all working together, life is so much easier for kids. So how do you know what is what? Well, certainly there are a couple of ways. One, if it's a subject issue, you'll see it in test scores. You'll see that test scores are lower than maybe turning in the homework or working on a project because they don't quite understand and have mastery of the content. On the other hand, it's an executive function issue if there's just lots of missing and late assignments. And it's not just in one subject, it's across a bunch of different subjects. And then, of course, there's overlap. But what they all have in common is there's this negative compounding effect of falling behind. And you can imagine what it feels like if you're in quicksand. You cannot get yourself out of quicksand, no matter how hard you try. You need somebody to extend a branch or a pole or something to grab onto and pull you out of it. And often kids are like this. They are in this quicksand. And to top it off, they're afraid to ask for help. It doesn't really make sense to us, but this is what happened. They're embarrassed. They don't want to be different. They don't want to look stupid. And so they do not ask for help, even when we as parents encourage them. So what do? Well, we cannot let them sit in academic quicksand. We need to extend that branch and get them out. And for many kids, that has to do with one-to-one instruction so that they can learn the material in a different way or learn executive function skills because they don't quite have them on their own. But the reason intervention is so important is that it actually goes back to that doom loop. And the bottom part of the doom loop is that hit to your self-confidence. If you sit in academic quicksand for too long, it just wreaks havoc on you as a student. And you just start to feel awful about the situation and you put forth less effort. So that's why we want to intervene early and be sure we can help kids. Sometimes we think as parents, well, maybe my child isn't doing that poorly. I mean, he has a C. A C back when we were kids was kind of average, but a C isn't like that now. It shows us, because an A is the most awarded grade in the US school system, a C tells us the student actually does not have mastery of the content. So we want to, be aware, not just of, missing assignments, but also the grade too. All right. So when kids do not understand the content, and they're struggling in a subject, it often creates this Swiss cheese effect. And Swiss cheese is like this chunk of cheese with a bunch of holes in it. Sometimes our students are like Swiss cheese. I was a Swiss cheese kid. I remember vividly sitting in my 8th grade algebra class, and I was so lost, but yet I cared and I wanted to do a good job. My parents thought I was a total slacker, and they didn't understand it because they were really motivated, like type A parents. And I was a mess. And I'd go into class every day and I'd say to myself, Anne, sit in the front and this time just like pay attention really, really hard. And I did that. But after about 5 minutes, my shoulders were aching, my neck was tense, and I just didn't get it. So I would start to zone out. And I had good intentions. I'd go home and I'd do my homework and I would try to do it, but I had these holes in my learning, like Swiss cheese. I knew some things, but I didn't know other things. So I'd often slap something down on a piece of paper to look like I did my homework. So this Swiss cheese effect is very often in cumulative subjects that you cannot get yourself out of, like math, physics, chemistry, those math-based sciences and certain foreign languages. They also show up in non-preferred subjects. Maybe your kid likes actually math and science, but they cannot stand to write. A couple people mentioned this. Super common in students with ADHD because writing takes a lot of working memory, which was it's a weakness for many students with executive function issues and ADHD. So they're just not into the subject, and they can be Swiss cheese too. And Swiss cheese is amplified when kids just do not gel with the teacher. And sometimes they'll say, I don't understand how the teacher is teaching, or my teacher doesn't like me. Those types of things are red flags to the Swiss cheese effect could be going on. So what do? Well, I can share with you what we do when we see kids that are struggling with the content, with the subject. First, oh, and by the way, we work with kids virtually, and we use this really cool screen sharing software called Lesson Space. It's designed for educators, and you can kind of see a snapshot of it. But it allows us to like not only share documents and annotate with the kids and highlight and use emojis and mark them up, but we can also do co-browsing with the student. It allows us to see when kids are paying attention based on where their cursor is and when they're not. But when it comes to content, we want to go back, and this is what many kids need. They need to fill in those gaps. So we reteach those concepts that are lacking in the foundation. We know, however, that remediation is not going to really help them to stay up with their work. So we'll also make sure that they understand what's going on in class right now. We'll help them with their homework. We'll help them prepare for a test. And then we'll take the last few minutes to preview what's coming next. And I tell you, this is what helps kids' confidence so much. When we say, hey, Sam, guess what? When you go to school tomorrow, we worked on this skill. This is the skill that you're going to see in class tomorrow. Let's practice it a little bit so that when that student goes to school the next day and the teacher's introducing something new, it's like, ba-boom. They understand it. They know it. And when they're able to wrap their brains around it, it's just so much easier for kids to pay attention. So it's kind of like a review preview approach. All right, so that's content and subject areas. Let's talk a little bit about executive function skills and the role that they play. Sometimes when kids have weak executive function skills, they may be a little bit resistant. And in order to get the students to engage, we give them a soft assessment. It's kind of like a conversational assessment to understand where they are on this continuum of stages, continuum of behavior. So during that first session, we want to see, is the student open and ready to receiving information? So we'll decide, when it comes to executive functions, this little survey we do, we'll go through each executive function and understand their willingness to engage. And so you can see the left of the continuum is that the student has no interest in making a change, or maybe they're at the preparation stage and they see the problem and they're willing to work on that. Some skills they will be, and some skills they won't be. So right at the beginning, we figure that out. We meet them where they are. And that's the value of understanding stages of change, which, by the way, is based on the trans-theoretical model. So if it's subject area tutoring, we might determine that they're on the far left of the chart because they're afraid to ask for help. They have these huge skill gaps and they don't even know where to start. That means we're going to meet them where they are and then work through the continuum of progress. I find this work really, really interesting. And in fact, we created an ebook about executive functions. And the first 4 pages of it are all about how to help kids make change in a very thoughtful way. And you can get this by downloading it at a website, ectutoring.com/grades-webinar. All right, so let's talk a little bit about executive function skills. How are they built in kids? I will tell you that when it comes to executive functions, there is no cure. I've seen a lot of brain training games that say we can fix your kids' executive functions. They do not work, nor does working on a particular skill without teaching that in the context of their academics. For example, you can work on estimating time all you want, but if you don't show and do that with the student's own work, there's not a carryover effect. So when we work with kids, we'll do a few things. Number one, we want to get them in the habit of going to their learning management software and seeing what they have to do. Their learning management software depends on their school district. It could be Canvas, Schoology, Blackboard, Google Classroom. It doesn't really matter what it is, but the idea is because our work is virtual, we'll go in with the child. We'll say, oh, let's look at your LMS together. Okay, let's see what you have due. Usually everything populates onto a calendar. We'll see what's due, and then we'll have them click through their classes so we can understand in each class what's coming up, the due dates, maybe there's a test, perhaps there's a rubric we need to know about for a writing assignment. But we'll have them record those upcoming assignments and tests onto their calendar and then break them into smaller chunks. We will work with them on completing their work because kids want to know in these sessions, what do they have to show for it? What do they get out of it? They feel better when they've gotten something done. And then we'll take the last few minutes to anticipate obstacles, meaning once kids have their plan for the week, there will be obstacles getting in their way. Let's say they have an essay due on Wednesday, and we'll say, what could get in your way of getting this done? The student might say, I don't know, my favorite show just dropped on Netflix, or, oh, I forgot to tell you, I have a late practice on Tuesday night. Okay, if you feel like you're going to be watching that show, what do you do to put that aside and to work on this essay? And so anytime we can troubleshoot obstacles in the beginning, it really helps kids when they get in that situation, because they will. Now, along the way, there are certain study skills that kids can learn to make them better students and improve their grades. I'm going to share with you just a few of the ones that we work on with students. The first is called distributed practice, and it's also called spaced practice. And it's this concept that instead of studying an hour on Thursday night before our test on Friday, just take that time and break it up. 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes Wednesday, 20 minutes Thursday, or even a half hour Wednesday, half hour Thursday. The reason that's helpful is honestly not really for the test, the quiz on Friday, because you'll probably do okay. But when you take that approach and then you have to know the information later for a big test, a unit exam, a midterm, you're going to retain it more because it's in your long-term memory. You've worked on it over time instead of just being in your short-term memory. So it is this studying in short bursts that pays dividends. And we want our kids not to know it just for now, but that they can use it in high school and they know it in college too. It's the same concept we use for backwards planning for projects. All right, you've got this due in 2 weeks. How do you plan backwards so that you're doing this in little chunks along the way instead of waiting until the last minute and stressing everybody out? Another study skill that is so helpful in improving grades is self-testing. Often, when kids study for a test, and this is sometimes why their grades aren't so good, because they'll take their study guide, which they often fill in class, or they'll take their notes, or they'll take a handout they have if they don't have a study guide, and they'll just reread it over and over and over, and they think they've studied. What happens is there's this illusion of knowing. It's an illusion of knowing. You think you know it, but you really don't, because you've just passively learned it. But if you self-test, you can learn it a lot more accurately. So that means instead of reading it, read the question and cover up the answer with your hand. Or if you're bringing it up on your laptop, just cover it up. And ask yourself the question, what is osmosis? And see if you can answer it. If you can, you look at the answer and make sure you're right. If you're not, you rack your brain, you try to remember. And when you really can't, then you look at it. That's a lot more active than just reading through it. Sometimes kids will get a teacher's study guide. Sometimes we help them create their own study guide. But the idea behind this is that you want to turn it into an active tool. Another way of going about this that we use with students is called the Stoplight Study Guide. Personally, I really like this for kids that feel easily overwhelmed and they're like, oh my God, there is just so much to do. I really don't want to study. They go into avoidance mode. I'm just not going to do it. Or I'll just read through some things super quick. So with the Stoplight Study Guide, you need three things. You need three highlighters. You need green, you need red, you need yellow. And because there's really not a red highlighter, I'm just using this analogy of the stoplight, you can get a hot pink highlighter. All right, so you need these three highlighters, and then what you're going to do is know the code. You're going to know that you're going to highlight the stuff you really know super well, green. If you're kind of shaky on it, you're like, I don't really know that so well, kind of like caution, highlight it yellow. And if you have no idea, highlight it red for hot pink. Your study guide is going to look like this, or your notes will look like this. And you can see what a relief sometimes. Oh my gosh, actually, this isn't so bad. I already know this green stuff. I'm not even going to study the green stuff. I already know that. Let me just study the yellow stuff and the hot pink stuff. That's not so bad after all. And you're using your time much more efficiently. I really like this approach for kids. And kids are willing to do it too. Now, sometimes though, kids are really anxious about testing. And for many kids, they show up at a test and they'll report having test anxiety, which is actually pretty common. Sometimes the test anxiety is because they haven't really prepared effectively. And so what we do is we make sure they practice in the context of the test. So for example, if the test is going to be short answer or essay, we're not going to use flashcards because that's not the format of the test. We're going to practice by giving them short answer questions that they answer with us so that when they're really familiar with the format, they can go then to the test and see, oh, wait, I've done this. I've been here. I know what this feels like. And it's kind of like, you know, reading a book you've already read before. You're just more comfortable. You understand it better and you're a lot less anxious. Other things that help are writing down your worries, everything you're stressed out about the day before the test. Get it all out of your mind. And then on the day of the test, if you've got a lot swirling on your mind, like let's say you have a history test, you need to know all these important people. You need to know these dates. You have to know these wars. Right before you start on a blank piece of paper, just get it all out. Just jot it all down. So you're releasing it from your frontal lobe. And now your frontal lobe is uncluttered and you can do your best on the test. So these strategies are all in an ebook that we put together, and you can download this in the same place as I mentioned before, ectutoring.com/grades-webinar. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the soft side of all this stuff. how do you talk to your kids? You know, how do you bring up these grades? What do you say? Sometimes parents ask, should I reward for good grades? Should I punish for bad grades? These are all common questions. So let's start out with these consequences and rewards. You know, there's a couple of types of consequences. One is a natural consequence, like your student forgot their homework. You already brought it to them. You brought it to school last week once. They ask you to bring it again. You can say, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that anymore. I reminded you to get your things together the night before. That would be a natural consequence that you're not willing to do that. And they kind of have to muddle through it on their own. But another consequence is a loss of privilege. And by the way, the natural consequence is fine. The loss of privilege would be, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you got a D. You haven't been trying at all. That's it. I'm sick of you on your phone. I'm taking away your phone for 30 days. That would be a consequence of a loss of privilege. And it's not always helpful because it can breed a lot of resentment and rebellion for kids, but it doesn't really show kids the replacement behavior. You're not really getting down to the crux of things to figure out why is this happening in the first place, so that they have, you're filling in the skills with them to make sure they know how to improve their grade. Then there's also rewards. There's praise, certainly, which we'll talk about in a second. And then there's also material. Like material would be, I'm going to pay you $50 for every A you get, which doesn't tend to work out well because it doesn't foster internal intrinsic motivation. Then kids start to think it has this unintended consequence of, well, my kid's only going to perform if I pay them or buy them something, or give them some type of materialistic reward. So sometimes that can backfire. But praise is a good thing, and praise can work. But we want to make sure we're just praising behavior, like the effort. I'm sorry. Like, oh, I noticed you came in and you started your homework right when you got in the house, so that you could get it done before your practice. I love how you put your phone in airplane mode. What a great idea to stay focused. So these noticing behaviors about effort can be really helpful. If you're in a situation where you want to talk to your child about their grades, you always want to approach kids when they're calm. Sometimes as parents, we can get all riled up and we're upset, our kids are upset, and we start to have an argument over grades. And whenever this happens, like this power struggle, there's never really a winner. So that doesn't always work out to talk to our kids when we're upset or they're upset. But instead, if we approach them when we're calm, we can use these words, as I mentioned before, I've noticed. So instead of saying like, I can't believe you got a D, or you would have gotten a much better grade, higher than a C if you just turned these assignments in. You could say something like, I noticed math is hard this quarter. Tell me about it. I noticed science can be a challenge. Tell me what's going on. How are you feeling about that? And the reason you're saying I've noticed is because you're just absorbing something. You're not passing any judgment. The goal initially is to get kids just to open up so you can have a conversation with them. Sometimes I used the scale of 1 to 5 with a student recently. He was struggling in math, and I asked him how math was going, and he was just like completely shut down. And so I knew that it was going to be hard for him to open up. So I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling about math? 5 being great, 1 being terrible. And he said, I'm a 2. And although he had a hard time putting words to it, he could give a number. And sometimes kids need that, like that prompt will help them think more about it. And that kind of like opens up the dialogue. Just by giving a number to have a conversation. In our work with kids, we often will talk to them about grades, more of like, let's try to figure this out together so we can kind of see how we can make it easier next time. So the prompt we might use is, oh, I know this grade was important to you. Tell me what got in your way. Or maybe we'll do an analysis of the class with the student and they'll see, maybe what went wrong. And we might say, looking ahead, what's the one thing you might do differently next time? Not all the things, because that's just overwhelming to kids, but like, just tell me, just what's the one thing? Or we might say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And of course, kids don't want to be, you don't want to editorialize the issue. And kids don't want that either. But sometimes we'll say, hey, I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes and then we're done talking about it. And then kids are like, okay, I can handle 3 minutes. No problem at all. At the end of the day, though, grades don't have to define your child. Grades are just one indicator, but there are lots of other great things that kids are good at in their lives. And we want to nurture their interests, what they're naturally good at, even if that's outside of school. Now, it doesn't mean that, oh, my child loves art. Let's just forget about grades and put them in all these art classes and not worry about everything else. Well, the reality is, grades still are important. We still need to support our kids to do the very best they can throughout school so they have opportunities and options later in life, whether that be college, a certificate program, whatever it is, but grades still do matter. So as we think about going forward, if we can be of help to you, if something resonated with you that you heard this afternoon, we're happy to help. You can book a 15-minute call with my colleagues, Kathy, Jennifer, or Ann Stewart, and get all your questions answered about your child and see if we here at Educational Connections might be a good match for you and your family. And you can scan the QR code to set up a call, or we'll also put it in the chat box. It was such a pleasure to speak to you. And again, we would love to help your child if we can be of assistance. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I wish you all the very, very best this school year and have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.